Hey, we've got some great news about the next patch. The creative director confirmed that they're going to improve the servers and answer questions about the quality of life updates. He also mentioned the possibility of customizing Titus in the campaign, discussed potential DLC or a Space Marine 3 sequel, and denied the possibility of larger maps, among other things we'll be talking about. Please support the channel by clicking the like button below, subscribing, and turn on notifications. We're starting with the server improvements. While I haven't personally noticed the issues with joining games, some players are experiencing problems, and you might be as well. Currently, the issue is that some players receive an error when trying to join a lobby. This player here tagged the creative director, asking if the servers would be improved, to which he responded with, "The backend team is constantly working on that, I can assure you." Now, things are slowly improving, and the servers are bound to get better with time. I get that this might not be reassuring for some of you that are experiencing server errors, but the good news is that Saber Interactive haven't stopped working on their servers. Recently, they have released a hotfix, so sooner or later we'll receive another update that might resolve some of those connection problems. Now, how about quality of life improvements? Is there a possibility that we'll see some soon? Yes and no. The reason I say yes is because the creative director responded to a player who asked if we can expect some quality of life features like a field of view slider, scopes, and sensitivity decimals as well. His response was that they're passionate about QoL improvements, but they need to focus on some of the bigger issues first. Proof can be seen here where he wrote, "We are very passionate about supporting QoL improvements. We're addressing game issues first, but we'll start thinking about QoL as soon as we're through that. I expect there will be official announcements as that happens." It would be nice to have a field of view slider. If you're on PC, you can easily do that by modifying a file, but if you're on console, you're kind of out of luck with that option. And not even kinda, you're just completely out of it. This is why I think it would be great to see that sooner rather than later. But of course, they have to focus on some of the bigger issues that some of us are experiencing. It makes a lot of sense too, right? You don't want to improve the game while there are some annoying bugs running around. Well, I guess that would be partially improving, but you get what I'm saying. So I'm all for them releasing a patch that improves things like the game's performance, connecting to lobby issues, and so on. Since this player brought up quality of life features, I would like to know, what QoL features would you like to see? Post a response down below and you might be featured in the next video. On a related note, we have news regarding the lack of customization in Space Marine 2's campaign. Before diving into that, I would like to mention that I wasn't expecting customization options for Titus, or really any customization options in the campaign, but there's a good chance we might see them introduce that in the near future. Let's first see why it wasn't possible, then we'll go over the creative director's message about it potentially happening, because he responded to someone on X that said, it was a moronic move to not include customization in game. He wrote back and said, "We were actually very limited for the campaign. There were a lot of lore rules we had to follow. I totally get your point, and it was something we considered, but having Marines switch in and out of different armor types and chapter markings would be problematic." I thought this was a fair response because when you're limited on your options and are required to stick with the lore, what else can you do, right? However, I can also understand why the majority would prefer to have a customization option, especially since there is an option for it in the campaign. I personally, I did feel that it was a missed opportunity that it wasn't included, but the same player wanted to know why there was a customization option if you're not allowed to change Titus's armor. Well, the creative director Oliver essentially responded that the developers were faced with certain limitations that were already in place, so they really couldn't change anything if they wanted to. For example, he responded to the same player and said, "Some of these things are limitations that were given and had to work with." Now, the same player responded to Oliver stating that the developers were instructed to include customization, but did not include appearances for Titus. And will Saber Interactive consider adding armor customizations for campaign in the season pass or on the roadmap? Surprisingly, the creative director response was somewhat ambiguous, stating, "Who knows, it might change." You can see the full response here where he wrote, "No, it's more about what armor Titus is allowed to use and when. There are some pretty strict rules about how a main character is portrayed. It's more about what we could not do, but who knows, that may change." So pretty much because of the lore, they were quite strict on what the armor would wear. Nonetheless, there's still a chance they could add different armors for the campaign. It likely depends on how much they're willing to deviate from the lore. If they did, I wouldn't mind seeing the Deathwatch Armor, which would be incredibly cool to see again. With that being said, my question is it a big deal to not have customization? Or is it something we absolutely needed at launch in the campaign? I don't think so, but I'd like to know your thoughts on this. Speaking of Deathwatch Armor, is there a chance we'll see it as an armor option in multiplayer at some point? A player on X was curious and asked when they could acquire the armor that was featured in the tutorial. Oliver responded by saying, "That's Mark 8 Deathwatch Power Armor, not currently available in multiplayer." Sure, he says it's not currently available, yet he didn't deny that we won't see it. I think there's a good chance we'll see it because Saber Interactive does a great job in communication and has taken into account some of the player suggestions recently discussed on the Focus Entertainment forums. Lastly, regarding armor, there was a great question from a player on X asking if we could see additional customizations beyond just weapons and armor. For instance, this player suggested it would be cool to collect gene seeds to unlock mutations or traits, something like the salamander skin or the red eyes. The only problem with this is that it would be an IP issue. The creative director wrote back and said, "That may actually be a GW question more than Saber. There are certain IP limitations to what we are allowed to do." This right here, it would be incredibly cool to have a salamander skin with red eyes. If they were granted permission and there were no IP restrictions, I believe it's something they would seriously consider and likely implement. The community would be so thrilled. I think you guys would go absolutely nuts over something like that. I know I would be grinding day and night to get it. Maybe at some point Saber Interactive will receive permission. Perhaps we should start petitioning Games Workshop until it becomes a reality. Alright, aside from the armor, Oliver at Saber Interactive was asked if they have plans to introduce a larger scale map in PvE, and if we can expect to see more than just 3 players in a mission, possibly 6 to 9, and Oliver responded with, "A Battlefield-style SM2 game mode would certainly be a sight to behold, but I think that would be a different game. It would require a whole new set of balancing rules to make it work and feel satisfying. Resource intensive to say the least, no plans for that right now." Unfortunately, it's not possible as you can tell, yet one can imagine how crazy that would actually be to be in a game with 6 players fighting against hordes of enemies on a larger sized map. It would be absolutely nuts, but it's a shame it's not going to happen because of how resource intensive it would be. However, from what it sounds like, he did say it wouldn't happen, there are just no plans for it right now. Part of me refuses to accept this as the final answer because the idea of a larger size map sounds so cool. If they can't do a larger size map, maybe they could create a PvE map that allows up to 6 players. I believe we could see that more likely instead of a larger Battlefield type map. Next, let's talk about expanding the campaign story, some questions about DLC and the Space Marine 3 sequel. The biggest problem for some players is, well, some do not want to wait long enough for a sequel and instead would prefer DLC. There's a player that said, "Is there plans to add more campaign stories in the future?" To which the creative director said in response, "It's definitely possible. The question will be whether this is DLC or SM3. The same player responded stating they would prefer the DLC over waiting a long time for SM3. The developer replied with, "Either way, it would take a long time to create something like that. It has to be done right. We certainly intend to keep the content coming though." So with this answer, does this mean we'll never see the story expanded? No, because the player asked Oliver if there would be any further story expansions and whether there would be new playable characters. It turns out the developers have some exciting things planned. Oliver responded with, "There will be future story additions, for sure, but I cannot comment on that at this time without spoiling it." Of course, it's to be expected, right? No spoilers, but it's cool to know that there are plans to expand the story. The expansion could go deeper into the lore. I mean, there are just numerous directions they could take, and I'm excited to see where they go. What would you like to see if they were to expand? Post a comment down below and let me know. On a similar note, the developers at Saber Interactive have confirmed to a player that new enemies are eventually going to be introduced. We already knew the devs plan to add a new enemy, as it's mentioned on the roadmap, however it specifies enemy and not enemies. Now to be fair, this could imply it's a new enemy faction with different enemy variants, similar to how the Terminus have smaller to medium-sized enemies. You can see the post here where the dev wrote, There's a post-launch roadmap that explains the next 18 months of content, but there are new enemies and missions for sure. For everything else, we'll have to assess resources and demand and see what's possible. This will be a long ride for sure with plenty of potential. So yeah, it's possible he's referring to one enemy faction with different variants rather than multiple distinct factions, but who knows what their plans are. I'd like to see more than just one enemy factions, but if they choose to focus on just one and go all out with it, I think that would be perfectly fine. We're now going to move along and talk about the DLC situation, as there seems to be a bug allowing players to purchase some downloadable content colors without actually owning the content. So a player wrote and tagged the dev saying, "Not sure if there's a bug or it's intended, but you can purchase DLC colors through the heraldry editor for the game currency. Just figured I'd make you guys aware of it." The developer simply responded by thanking this person. "Since I already own the content, I can't test this out myself, but feel free to try it out and return to this exact video to let me know what happened, whether or not you were able to purchase any sort of DLC colors." This right here is crazy if it's true, because it means a lot of players right now could take advantage of this glitch and apply some of those DLC colors without actually owning the content. The question is, can the devs take it away once you have purchased it? I don't think the devs would be able to remove it once you have applied it, especially if you save your color options. On a completely different note, I mentioned in a previous video how there's an increasing number of hackers online, specifically on PC. If you're on console, you do have the option to opt out of crossplay. To do this, if you want to know, go to Settings, navigate to the first tab, which you should be on it automatically. Scroll all the way down until you find the crossplay option and switch it from on to off. This will really help out a lot. It will prevent you from encountering PC players who might be using hacks to win PvP games, or they might be using it in a PvE game. Mostly, a lot of them are using it in PvP because they're able to one-shot anybody that's in the lobby, and they're definitely using speed hacks. The best scenario would be to turn off crossplay if you're on console, but if you're on PC, you're kind of screwed. So the best case scenario is to wait it out until Saber Interactive does something, right? Because currently, right now, a lot of players can bypass the anti-cheat system, which is easy anti-cheat. And yeah, it's pretty easy to bypass, by the way. From what I've heard and seen, it's pretty easy. Last but not least, Oliver at Saber Interactive posted this right here and said, "I'm happy to start taking questions about the story and characters. Beware, this thread may contain spoilers. There's a player here that wanted to know if the Tomb World and its inhabitants are going to be a thing that's going to happen. Like, is it going to pop up as an add-on or a future title?" And Oliver responded with, "If I told you it could spoil things, the 40k universe is massive, and that Tomb World shows people ancient and complex the galaxy is. That races have come and gone before humans have even existed is such a great theme. There's a lot of potential for great stories." So I wonder if that kind of relates back to what we talked about earlier in this video, about how the developer did not want to spoil anything about the expansion or what the new enemies could be. So maybe there's something revolving around that potentially, who knows? But that would be awesome if they do have something that does exist around the Tomb World. Now, if you do not know much about Warhammer 40k and that area specifically, I won't go into depth about it. Maybe it's for another video. But to be honest, that would be so awesome to see. And it just gives you just more insight on what these developers are planning on doing. I mean, they have probably so many ideas stacked. And I can't wait, guys. It's going to be interesting to see what they do. So with all that being said, this is your Space Marine 2 news. If you guys have any questions about today's video, definitely ask down below. If you do receive a top comment in this video, I will be featuring it in the next video at the very end. So definitely comment down below and you might just be featured. I would like to say thank you guys so much for watching the video. If you guys do end up watching this one, I appreciate the support so much. And I hope that you guys will follow me on my Twitter or X account. Not only that, but make sure you do subscribe to this channel as well. So with that all said, thank you guys again, and I'll see you guys in the next one.